Could someone love you and still hurt you? I think that's a great question. And I think the answer is complex. And because the answer is complex, I feel that it's important to address this early on in the podcast. It's not a simple yes or no. What I'm going to share today is from my opinion, my experience, my knowledge. Relationship experts, therapists might not agree with me. This is 100% my opinion. And I think this is important for how we continue through this journey together. Welcome to the He Blamed It On Me podcast. I am your host, Jamie. The He Blamed It On Me podcast is my unfiltered story about living in, leaving, and recovering from a relationship that went from amazing to abusive in a single conversation. Part story, part survival guide. This podcast is for survivors, people still living in it, and anyone who's trying to understand what it's like to go through emotional abuse. Let's talk about, can someone love you and hurt you? And so first, let's look at this to really determine the hurt portion of it. There's a lot that matters when it comes to hurt and how we define hurt for this. Because there's things we can do. We can be the best person. We can love someone and we can want everything right. And we still hurt people. We still hurt the people we love. And so I feel like there's two things we need to look at when we talk about, can someone love you and still hurt you? To say, is this a yes or no answer? And those two things are pattern and intent. We have to look at the pattern of behavior. Is it a one-off incident or is it a pattern of behavior? When I started learning about emotional abuse, one of the things that comes up that we will talk about later on this podcast is emotional invalidation. One of the things I read that is true is we all will invalidate people's emotions at times. It's just human nature. It's a matter of, was it done as a one-off, or is someone always invalidating you? Or not always, because we don't want to go into that always or never category, but frequently, continuously invalidating you. It's the same with hurt, whether it's emotional validation or another type of hurt. People will do things that hurt you. And is it a one-off thing, or is it something that is continuously happening? But then we also have to look at the intent. What was the intent behind that? Was the intent to hurt you, or was the intent something else? So I'm going to give you two examples here. The first one was something that happens between myself and a friend. So like I said, we are all guilty of emotionally invalidating people. It's just, was it a one-off thing or was it a pattern of behavior? And so this friend of mine, he was telling me about something that was happening at work, something that was stressing him out. And then he made comment about having to lead his team through it. And I sent him a message back because this was all in text message, talking something about the team. And he responded back about how I completely invalidated his experience and what he was going through. When I read what he said and why he felt invalidated, and I went back and looked at his original message of what he told me, or when he was telling me about this, everything that was going on, I realized that I misinterpreted what he said. So when I then sent him a message, I sent it based off of my interpretation of what he said. Now that I received his other message and went back and reread what he initially wrote me, I was like, oh my gosh, I took that to mean something completely different. Now that I know what he was actually saying, I can't believe I said to him what I said. It completely took his feelings and emotions out of the situation, and my response focused on his team in a way that, once again, ignored him, ignored what he was personally going through, and focused on what he needed to do for his team. And I don't want to get into any specifics, but it was one of those things that's like, once I got that additional information, my emotional invalidation to me was very, very clear. I did it, but that wasn't my intent. And I was able to say, I am so sorry. That was not my intent. I misinterpreted what you said here. Now that I have the more information to understand how I misinterpreted what you said, you were 100% right. I did invalidate your emotions. Let's scratch that. Let's start over. Here's what I should have said. So it's one of those things of like, I hurt him in that conversation, but it wasn't my intent. And I was able to fix that. There are a lot of times I talk to my children all the time about intent versus impact. And we might not intend to hurt someone, but sometimes we still do. And when they are hurt, we look at intent versus impact. And we don't invalidate the impact that happens. That impact is real, but sometimes we look at what was the intent behind the other person's action. And it allows them to figure out how to move forward. Is this person someone they can still trust and it was a mistake? Or is it someone that is starting to show you that they cannot be trustworthy and we need to maybe start guarding ourselves or moving ourselves out of that relationship, whether it's a friendship or whatever it is? So now the other thing we want to talk about is another example of this intent versus impact. This kind of comes to the physical side of hurt. I kind of view it as there's two things when it comes to a physical altercation. One is done out of protection, and the other is done out of harm. So I remember this was years and years and years ago. We were at a concert, had been drinking, and one of the other women we were with stepped on my foot with her stiletto heel, and I shoved her away. My body went into kind of like fight or flight mode because I was experiencing so much pain that I immediately just pushed her out of the way. I was protecting myself at that point. My body went into protection, get this hurt away. How do you get this person who hurt you away? And I pushed that person away. She could have got hurt. She could have got hurt from me shoving her away. Was my intent to hurt her? Absolutely not. Was her intent to hurt me when she stepped on my foot? Absolutely not. My reaction was out of protection. And I feel like there's sometimes when there's things in relationships that maybe something happens and we go into protection mode and we might hit or shove or do something to protect ourselves. We're in that fight or flight mode and we are protecting ourselves. Can we still love the person that we just might have physically hurt, whether it's a small hurt or a big hurt, because we were protecting ourselves because we go into fight or flight mode? Yes, I believe that is true. There's probably a lot that we need to look into there, or maybe you'd look into with a therapist of why you went into fight or flight mode. Was there other things you could have done to protect yourself? Yes, I'm not denying any of that stuff, but there is sometimes where we might hurt someone or have a physical altercation because we immediately go into protection mode. We are protecting ourselves. But then there's the other type of hurt where we're not doing it to initially protect ourselves because we feel that we are in physical harm. We are doing it, or people are doing it towards us, to assert control. I can hurt you. I can scare you. I can intimidate you. And I can hurt you. It's not about them protecting themselves. It's about them hurting you. So I feel like when you're on that side of the coin and they are hurting you to claim dominance, to scare you, to make you feel weaker, that is a side of the story where I say, can someone love you if they hurt you? And the answer is no. Because the person that loves you is not going to want to be controlling you. Because control and love are not the same thing. So for me, one of the reasons that I bring this up is people will sit there and say, well, what about my story? We're only 3 chapters in. And when I start telling people this and when they start reading this, for the few people that I let read this, they kind of sit there in shock. People I don't know will be like, well, he was hurting you. Like, he was emotionally hurting you. And why did you allow it? And I will say, I was confused. At this point of the story, I was confused. Something was happening. Something was going on that was making things happen that were out of the norm. And I was just confused. I think the best way to describe how I felt, what was going on around me, was if you are a fan of Marvel Comics and you watch the ones where they're talking about the multiverse. And with the multiverse, if we look at it from the Doctor Strange movie where he goes into the different multiverses and there's the different versions of Doctor Strange, all these different versions of Doctor Strange are played by the same character, but they have different personalities. And some of them look exactly like him. Some of them are in maybe different colors or a little bit more disheveled or things like that. But to someone who doesn't know what's going on, it's still the same Doctor Strange that they're used to because it looks like him. And that's kind of how I felt what was going on in my home. To me, it was like my husband was swapped with someone on a different timeline. This version of him that showed up in my home looked like him, acted like him in enough ways to make other people believe it was the same person. But the thing that was different was how he treated me and how he acted towards me. And so I was confused because it's the same person. It's the same face I've been seeing for 15 years. It's the same person that's showing up in these other instances the same towards everyone else like he has for the last 15 years. Why is all of a sudden he treating me differently? Why all of a sudden is he hurting me? And I was just left confused on what was really going on inside my home and inside my relationship and how this could even be the same person. And all I knew was that something was going on. And how can you say you love somebody if you're not going to be there and support them when something is going on that is so different than the norm? It's one of those things where you talk about where, for better or for worse, in your marriage vows, sickness or in health, you don't leave somebody because they're sick. But that person, while they're sick, they might not treat you the same as they did when they're not sick. I remember having a conversation with my, who is now ex-mother-in-law, so mother-in-law at the time. When we had this particular conversation, it's much later in the story. So to me, I was at a point of like, you don't understand what's actually going on in my home. But I feel like for this part of the story, it fits. And she was telling me about when her husband, so my ex-father-in-law, was going through cancer treatment. He was not the nicest person. And she stuck by his side and she accepted the treatment. And one of the things that I always thought about with that was, well, yes, he was going through cancer treatment. He was tired. His body was being filled with chemicals. He was, exhausted from the inside out, the outside in. That wasn't him forever. That was a moment in time when he was going through something and it was causing him to be short-tempered. It was causing him to act differently than normal because he was sick. And I think that is a perfect example about what was going on in this time. Something was going on with my husband that was making him not act normal. And I needed to be by his side. I couldn't hold that against him at this point in the story because just like when my ex-father-in-law had cancer, he was going through something that caused him to act outside his normal character. My husband was going through something that was causing him to act outside of his normal character. And he did not deserve to be left for that. I think when you're on the outside, it's easy to say that you would leave at the first sign of abuse. But one of the things you'll notice as I'm going through the stories and going through the chapters, the word abuse had not been said yet. I didn't know my relationship was starting to be abusive. I didn't know the abuse that was going to come later. I didn't know that at that point in time. So it's very easy when you're listening from the outside to say that you would have done stuff that when you're in it doesn't even seem like it's an option. And not because you feel stuck, but because why am I going to jump to that conclusion? It doesn't make sense for what I know and what I've been experiencing. This was new behavior that occurred after 15 years. 15 years of living with someone who acts completely differently than what I was experiencing in this moment. And I am the type of person that had not put up with poor treatment before. The last guy that I seriously dated before my husband was a good example of this. There was an incident where I left his house in tears. And I remember thinking to myself, is this who he really is? Or is this a one-off thing? Was this a bad night? Because everybody's allowed to have bad nights. We all go into bad moods where we're just like, oh my God, why did I do that? Why did I say that? You regret the words as soon as they come out of your mouth. And it doesn't define you, but it was something that happened. And the next time we were hanging out was what I will classify as his chance. It was his chance to prove to me that that was a one-off incident or I was done. And what happens that next night made me believe that it was not a one-off incident. And I said, I'm done. And I never talked with him again because I don't put up with bad treatment. I don't put up with the person who is going to be not good for me long term. But that was not the case with my husband. Once again, it was 15 years in where all of a sudden things changed in one conversation. So something was going on. Something caused that change. What was it? So you might be listening and wonder why I tolerated it, why I put up with it. I obviously put up with a lot because we are only 3 chapters in, and obviously this story has a lot more chapters. Otherwise, I wouldn't be starting a whole podcast around it. And so if you're sitting there thinking right now, why did I let this continue? You're probably going to be thinking that a lot more throughout the story. And I will tell you that the reason was love. And when you love someone, you are willing to make sacrifices if it means helping and supporting them. And there's a difference, and I will eventually get to this tipping point where you realize you're completely sacrificing yourself to help and support them. But sacrificing yourself completely is different than making little sacrifices along the way. And sometimes those little sacrifices are enough. And sometimes those sacrifices add up to you're completely sacrificing yourself. And those are 2 extremes that are different scenarios. So at this point of the story, I was willing to make the little sacrifices because I wanted to help him, because I loved him. And I guess one of the things that I would question you about if you're saying that you wouldn't put up with this right now would be if you were in my shoes and you refused to make the little sacrifices at this point in time. If you walked away at this point in time, do you really love the person you're claiming to love? To be fully honest, I thought I was protecting myself from the worst of things so many times throughout this journey. I didn't realize how much sacrificing I was doing in the name of love. I thought I was protecting myself. I thought I was being strong in a way that was going to save our marriage and make everything worth it. I didn't realize how much I was sacrificing and that it was all adding up. So to go back to the original question, can someone love you and hurt you? Yes, as long as that hurt is one-off and it's not intentional. Can someone love you and intentionally hurt you and repeatedly hurt you? No. That is not love. But can you allow someone to repeatedly and intentionally hurt you and you still love them? Unfortunately, yes.